54 million passenger trips in a country of 7 million people on a railway that didn't exist 5 years ago. Read that again. 54 million. In a country where, before 2021, the only railway was a 7-kilometer colonial relic that connected to absolutely nothing. A stretch of track roughly the length of 70 football fields, going nowhere, serving no one. That was Laos's entire rail network. And China just replaced it with one of the most advanced rail corridors in Southeast Asia. In 5 years, through some of the most punishing mountain terrain on the planet. But here's the thing nobody's telling you. This wasn't really about Laos. This is about the most ambitious land trade corridor since the Silk Road, a continuous rail line from deep inside China all the way to Singapore, 600 million people connected by steel. And the China-Laos Railway is just the first domino, the first piece of a puzzle that is already reshaping who wins in global trade for the next 50 years. The West has no answer for this, and by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why. Subscribe if you want more. This channel is where we follow the infrastructure the news forgets to cover. So let's start where the story actually starts, with a country so boxed in by geography that for most of its history, it was effectively invisible. Laos. Population 7 million. No coastline, no port, no direct access to the ocean. Completely surrounded on all sides. Thailand to the west, Vietnam to the east, China to the north, Cambodia and Myanmar rounding out the cage. In global trade, a landlocked nation is like a fighter with one arm tied behind its back. You can still compete, but everyone else gets a structural head start every single time. And the land itself made it worse. The northern half of Laos is almost entirely steep mountain ranges and deep river valleys. Terrain that is expensive to cross, brutal to maintain roads through, and punishing in a way that compounds year after year for a country with very limited money to begin with. Geography didn't just slow Laos down, it trapped it. Here's what that looked like in practice. A truck hauling rice from one Laos city to another could take an entire day on narrow mountain roads. Farmers watched their produce rot in transit. Tourists skipped the country because getting around was too painful. And the big trade corridors moving goods between China and Southeast Asia, they bypassed Laos completely, flowing through Vietnam, through Thailand, through Myanmar, as if Laos simply didn't exist on the map. That was the situation, and it had been the situation for generations. So how did it change? Because China decided it needed something, and what China needed, it turned out, ran directly through the heart of this forgotten mountain nation. The idea of a Laos-China railway wasn't new. Government officials in Vientiane were discussing it as far back as the early 2000s. The logic was obvious. Laos sits in the direct path between China and the rest of Southeast Asia. A railway through the country could flip everything. Instead of a dead end everyone went around, Laos becomes a corridor everyone goes through, from invisible to essential, from landlocked to land-linked. But the numbers made it look almost absurd. The cost of building through that terrain was enormous. A major corruption scandal inside China's own railway sector sent ripples through the planning. Financing stayed uncertain. Years passed. The dream stayed a dream. Then, in 2013, everything changed. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing's grand strategy to build roads, railways, ports, and pipelines connecting dozens of countries across Asia, Africa, and Europe. The goal? Make China the center of a global trade web so dense that the entire world economy runs through it. And suddenly, Laos wasn't just a poor landlocked country with a transportation problem. It was a missing link in something vastly larger. China needed a reliable land route heading south into Southeast Asia. Laos sat directly in the path. The geography that had been Laos's curse for generations became, overnight, its single greatest asset. In 2016, the deal was finalized. China would fund the overwhelming majority of the $6 billion cost for the Laos section through loans. Both governments entered a joint venture. And here's where you sit with the scale of what was being proposed. $6 billion represented nearly half of everything Laos produced as an entire economy in a single year. This wasn't just a big infrastructure bet. It was the biggest financial commitment in the country's history, by a distance that isn't close. Construction began, and what happened next was extraordinary. The Laos section of the railway runs 414 kilometers, Vientiane in the south, all the way up to the Chinese border in the north, where it links directly into China's existing network in Yunnan province and continues up to the city of Kunming. The full cross-border system, both sides, carried a combined price tag of around $20 billion. That's roughly the GDP of a mid-sized European city, spent on a single rail corridor through mountains most of the world couldn't find on a map. And this is not some slow regional train bumping along at 50 kilometers an hour. The line is fully electrified, standard gauge track, designed for speeds up to 160 kilometers per hour. A journey that once took a full day by road now takes a couple of hours. Think about what that actually means for someone's life, not abstractly, but concretely. A farmer who used to watch his harvest spoil on a truck over winding mountain roads now loads it onto a train that arrives intact, on time, every time. But building it required solving problems on a scale that most engineers never encounter. Here's where it gets insane. Construction officially started at the end of 2016. Workers spread across the country, setting up camps, cutting access roads, and before a single tunnel could be drilled or a single foundation poured, they hit bombs, unexploded ordnance from the Vietnam War era, sitting silently underground for more than 50 years, scattered through large stretches of the planned route. Work stopped, specialist teams moved in. The ground had to be carefully cleared before anything else could happen. That alone tells you something about the nature of what was being attempted here. Then came the mountains themselves. Out of 414 kilometers of track, more than half the route required either a tunnel punched through a mountain or a bridge spanning a valley. The final project included 75 tunnels and hundreds of bridges and elevated viaducts, some of them stretching for kilometers at a stretch. To supply all those remote construction sites, workers first had to build temporary access roads carved into the hillsides just to get heavy equipment to the right locations. In some areas, entire communities had to be carefully relocated before the ground could be broken. It wasn't just a railway being built, it was an entire parallel world of logistics being constructed around the railway just to make the railway possible. Sit with that number, 75 tunnels, in a single 414-kilometer stretch. That's a tunnel on average every 5.5 kilometers. The Swiss built the Gotthard Base Tunnel, the world's longest railway tunnel at 57 kilometers, and it took 17 years. China and Laos built 75 tunnels in the same amount of time it takes most Western countries to finish an environmental impact assessment. Major earthworks were done by late 2021. Track laying was completed on October 12th of that year. On December 3rd, 2021, the railway officially opened to passengers and freight. 5 years. 75 tunnels. Hundreds of bridges. A country that had never had a proper railway now had one of the most advanced lines in all of Southeast Asia. Now here's the kicker, the numbers that followed. In the first months, ridership was steady. Travel restrictions were still complicating movement across the region. But as those eased, something shifted. People started showing up in numbers nobody had projected. By February 2025, 48.6 million passenger trips. By the end of that year, 62.5 million, 62.5 million trips. On a railway serving a country of 7 million people, that's nearly 9 times the country's entire population moving through the system in a single year. Picture what that looks like on the ground. Families packing into carriages for weekend trips to Luang Prabang, a journey that used to mean hours on a winding mountain road, now reduced to a comfortable train ride. University students from small towns finally able to reach city campuses without spending half a day on a bus. Small traders riding north to buy goods from Chinese markets that were simply too costly to haul by truck before. Elderly villagers making trips they had never been able to make in their entire lives. And around every station, something no one fully anticipated. Small economies blooming from nothing. Food vendors, tuk-tuk operators, guest houses within walking distance of the platforms, all reporting steady, growing business at predictable times every single day. The train wasn't just moving people, it was redistributing economic energy into places that had been quiet for decades. Freight numbers told the same story. By December 2025, the railway had moved 72.5 million tons of cargo, and the variety of goods expanded in a way that shows genuine economic integration taking hold. In the earliest months, only a handful of product categories moved along the line. By 2025, that number had grown to over 3,000 different categories: agricultural produce, electronics, machinery, textiles, chemicals, building materials. Things that used to sweat on trucks for days now crossing the country in hours. 3,000 categories. That's not a railway serving a niche. That's a railway becoming the circulatory system of a regional economy. Here's the part of this story that most coverage misses completely. The China-Laos Railway isn't the destination. It's the ignition point, because what it set off in the countries around it is still accelerating, and the full consequences are only beginning to show. Thailand is the most immediate example. The Laos Railway ends at the northern border, right across a river bridge from Thailand's Nong Khai province. Thailand has been developing its own high-speed rail connection between Bangkok and Nong Khai. When that link is complete, and the planning is already underway, the two systems connect directly. A passenger or a shipping container will be able to travel by rail from deep inside China all the way to Bangkok. No trucks, no boats, no transfers. Investors already read that future. Land values near planned Thai station sites jumped significantly before construction even finished, because people who understand logistics understand what a direct China to Bangkok rail corridor does to trade volumes, factory location decisions, and regional supply chains. Thai farmers are already mapping out how to use the northbound rail to reach Chinese consumers faster. Agricultural products, auto parts, processed foods, entire industries are recalculating their economics based on a rail link that doesn't fully exist yet. Vietnam and Cambodia are running the same calculations. Both countries are actively evaluating cross-border rail projects, motivated in part by watching how quickly the Laos line proved its value. When one nation demonstrates that a massive infrastructure bet can deliver returns this fast, its neighbors start asking a very uncomfortable question: are we falling behind? And that's the part nobody's talking about. Zoom all the way out, and the picture that comes into focus is staggering. The long-term vision behind all of this is a continuous rail corridor running from Kunming, China, all the way to Singapore, through Laos, through Thailand, through Malaysia, and beyond. 600 million people connected by rail. Manufacturers across the region gaining an alternative to crowded, unpredictable sea lanes. And a reshaping of where factories get built, where goods get produced, and how quickly products move across one of the most economically dynamic regions on Earth. That is not a marginal improvement to how Southeast Asia works. That is a structural shift in the region's economic geography, and it is already underway. While Europe spent a decade arguing about high-speed rail between cities 2 hours apart, China built a cross-border mountain railway through some of the world's most hostile terrain, through a country that had to clear 50-year-old bombs from the ground first, and opened it in 5 years. The United States has been trying to build high-speed rail in California since 2008. That project is not finished. The China-Laos Railway is. Now I want to be straight with you, because this channel doesn't do propaganda. The debt picture here is real, and it matters. Laos owes a significant share of its national debt to China as a result of this project. That creates a dependency that requires careful management, and if you talk to economists who follow the region seriously, they'll tell you the stakes are high in both directions. If Laos's economy grows fast enough and the railway continues generating the revenue and activity it's currently producing, the country can handle those payments and come out stronger. If growth slows or terms tighten, that debt becomes a lever, and the country that holds the lever is not Laos. That's a real concern. It deserves to be named clearly. There are also genuine questions about how broadly the economic benefits are spreading. The debate across Southeast Asia right now isn't whether the railway works. It clearly does. The debate is whether the gains are flowing broadly to ordinary people in Lao villages or concentrating mostly among large regional players and Chinese logistics companies already positioned to capture the volume. Those are two very different stories, and it's too early to say with certainty which one is unfolding. And China isn't without competitors here. Japan has been deeply involved in Southeast Asian infrastructure for decades. The Shinkansen model is a serious rival to Chinese rail exports. India is pushing its own regional connectivity agenda. The United States has the Blue Dot Network and the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment as alternatives to Belt and Road. Whether any of these develop the same on-the-ground momentum is genuinely uncertain. The competition is real. The honest assessment is this: the railway is built, the trains are running, the cargo is moving, and the numbers are real. The long-term political and financial consequences are still being written. There's a quote from a Lao official reported shortly after the opening that has stayed with me. He described the shift not as going from poor to rich, but as going from landlocked to land-linked. It sounds like marketing. But stand at the Vientiane station on a Monday morning, watch the students and traders and families who never had this before, and it doesn't sound like marketing anymore. For generations, the mountains of Laos were walls. They kept things in and kept the world out. 62.5 million trips a year later, those walls have been punched through, literally 75 times over. Whether Laos can convert this new position into lasting distributed prosperity for its own people, that question is still open. Whether Thailand's link completes and the full corridor lights up as designed, that question is still open. Whether the Kunming to Singapore dream eventually becomes reality, and what that does to the map of global trade when it does, still open. But the railway is not hypothetical. The trains are not hypothetical. The mountain through which the engineers drilled has no opinion about geopolitics. What do you think happens when the full Bangkok corridor opens? Does the prosperity flow broadly, or does it concentrate at the top? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you're seeing from where you sit. If this gave you something new to think about, hit the like and subscribe. There's a lot more of this story still to tell.